when my child is 18, I think a lot of us assume like, oh, they're going to go out on their own and they're going to go to college. And when you have a child with a special need, and especially a more severe special need, it's so up in the air. You don't know. And, you have to really put yourself in check and not project those fears on them or their growth. And you just have to do your best, and you just dive in and put one foot in front of the other.
A movement is underway of people abandoning the emotional, physical, and financial expenses of city living and crafting their own purpose, livelihoods, and joy in the rural reaches. The Urban Exodus podcast shares the wisdom, wit, and stories of those who decided to embark on the road less traveled, to pursue their own interpretation of the good life. Small business owners, change makers, artists, farmers, and more, working towards building a better future for themselves and their fellow citizens. This podcast is for country dreamers, rural folk, and urban dwellers alike who want to feel more connected to the natural world and the purpose and choices in their lives. I'm Melissa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. I'm excited to invite you to my conversation with Molly Leary. Molly is a single mother, musician, and small business owner. She runs Squash Blossom Vintage, offering one-of-a-kind pieces that reflect her love of late 60s and 70s fashion. She has pivoted throughout the years, going from consignment to pop-up to brick and mortar, and now she sells exclusively through her weekly Instagram stories. Molly has built a roster of repeat customers from all over the world, and her business has been featured in Vogue, Elle, and Mother magazine. Molly left the vibrant music scene of Austin, Texas, so that she could be closer to family and build a better life for her girls. While living in Austin, Molly's 2 daughters were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. It initially felt overwhelming because it was a steep learning curve to understand the unique needs of each of her girls and figure out what was available to assist in their learning and development. She decided to move back to her childhood stomping grounds in the Gold Country of California because the resources for children with special needs were superior to what was available in Texas. It also meant that her daughters could grow up with their grandma and aunt nearby. While searching for online available rentals, Molly accidentally clicked on a home for sale and not for rent. It was the house she had always dreamed of. All redwood, passive solar, built in the same era as the clothing that she sold. It seemed impossible as a cash-only fixer-upper that she couldn't afford, but she just couldn't shake the feeling that this was destined to be the place where she raised her daughters, and she had to find a way to make it work. It felt like divine intervention when her new community rallied together to help her get the house. Molly has found success and work-life balance with her small vintage business, and she offers some great advice about not rejecting the path that speaks to your authentic self, your skills, and your talents. In our conversation today, we speak about motherhood, navigating the complexities of an autism diagnosis, and creative entrepreneurship. This is a story about a mother's love, manifesting dreams, and cultivating everyday happiness. I hope you enjoy.
I am so excited to have you on the podcast. I met you, I want to say it was the winter of 2019.
I think that was right. At my house.
Yeah, at your house. And wow, we find ourselves in a totally different world now. But upon first meeting you, I had followed your journey online for so long, and you take these dreamy, beautiful photographs. And I just wondered, could it be the same in real life as depicted online? And it was. And that doesn't always happen. And also, I met this just really incredible woman who's doing really inspiring things in her life. And living a really beautiful and peaceful life with your daughters. And so I'm really excited to have you on the podcast for you to share your story.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to see you again.
Absolutely. I guess first off, I'd love for you to share a little bit of your personal backstory, kind of where you grew up, your career path, and how you ended up in your home where you are now.
It's kind of a funny story, the whole thing. I grew up just 20 minutes, probably 20, 30 minutes down the mountain from where my girls and I are now. So I grew up in what now is a very busy, crazy town. But when I was a kid, it was a farming train town, you know? So I grew up there. I studied at St. Mary's Moraga. I got a degree in communication and a degree in women's studies and a minor in dance. Didn't really know what I wanted to do with any of those things. Moved to San Francisco soon after. I always played music too. And I just never really found my footing. It just nothing really stuck. I worked in high fashion a lot in buying, and I just wasn't passionate about it at all. I knew it wasn't something that I was going to be super happy progressing in. And when I was walking home one day from work, I stopped into this amazing little vintage clothing store, and I'd always bought vintage and had a love for it. And I just said, hey, do you guys need help? And one of the owners was moving, and she said, yeah, we need someone to run the store. So I did that, and that kind of began my journey as a vintage clothing dealer. And I've been doing that now for, I don't even know, 16 years. It's one of those things that I just was supposed to do. I love it. It's still super fun. It's very easy for me, and that very organic, just natural. This is kind of my place. This is like my sweet spot. So I went to Austin, played music, did vintage there, and discovered when my second daughter was about to be born that my first daughter, who was 17 months younger, I had a very strong gut feeling that she was on the autism spectrum, like fairly certain of it. That began a very quick educational journey of just kind of like, oh my God, what do we do here? Got her into speech, got her into all these things, and realized that the programs in California, kind of back where I'm from, were more advanced than what they had at that time in Texas. So we quickly got my family back to California and stayed with my mom briefly. And one day was just online and happened to see this house that was my dream house. And it was, a cash deal that I didn't have. And I just kept going back and visiting the lady, being like, I don't know what to tell you. This is my house. And eventually she convinced and had me meet these two guys that wanted to flip the house. And she's like, hey, I want you to come meet these people, tell them your story. And they fixed everything that was making it unlendable, got the city water piped into it and all the metering. And they sold it to me so that I could get a loan for it. And we've been there for 4 years, and every day I just can't believe that I get to live there. So organically kind of the vintage business went from pop-ups and brick and mortars to, I'm fortunate enough now to be in the position where I can just sell online, and that served me well in the past year. So that's where we are. The girls are both in various programs. They're both on the spectrum in different places. And it's kind of just a magical little house. And, there was oak trees, but no plants there, and kind of started from the ground up. And it's just an ongoing process of creating the garden and all of the things that can, be educational tools for the girls. And it's been amazing.
One of the things that I just really love about you and connected with you on, I think that there's so much fear in the autism space, especially for parents. And the way that you have approached just, kind of shepherding your daughters through and trying to find, the best resources for them. But also, I'd love for you to speak a little bit, if you had any advice for parents who maybe just had the diagnosis or are living in rural spaces and feeling like, the services aren't here. What do I do? Or thinking about leaving a city, but that's something that's really weighing on their mind. Will I have the same access to care?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a thing that really, unless you're a parent or someone, incredibly close to somebody, when you have the hunch that your child is autistic or has any sort of special needs. It's like a daily rollout where my experience, it was this very dark cloud. And, when I describe it to people who are going through the recent diagnosis with their children, they're like, yes, that's what it is. There's a feeling in those moments, for me at least, where I just thought my life, on a selfish level, my life is going to be less than somehow. Like what I had dreamed for my life is going to be less than. And I think it's hard to not go through that a little bit. It's like more than a self-pity thing. It's just kind of like this very harsh realization of the amount of work, when my child is 18, I think a lot of us assume like, oh, they're going to go out on their own and they're going to go to college. And when you have a child with a special need, and especially a more severe special need, it's so up in the air. You don't know. And, you have to really put yourself in check and not project those fears on them or their growth. And you just have to do your best and you just dive in and put one foot in front of the other. And the crazy thing that happened to me is it only took a year or so from that very dark cloud moment of just feeling like I am so alone in this world. Like who understands? And as mothers, like, I think it's already hard enough to connect with another mom in the world that, you can really relate to. Someone like me, I have, so many things I want to do in my life and so many skills I want to learn. I'm always wanting to learn stuff. And, when you start having this feeling like that's not going to be able to happen, I'm definitely here to say that is not my reality at all anymore. My life is way better, so much more beautiful and light than I ever could have imagined my life from the get-go. Having these children has enhanced and created such a greater appreciation for everything around me. Any milestone, and we don't even, I think as parents, you're always, oh, what milestone are they hitting? When are they crawling? When are they And it's just like that all goes out the window and you're like, I care less about that. Like some days I'm trying to get her to eat, Suzanne, I'm trying to get her to eat like a different brand of gluten-free, organic chicken nugget. And she's, it's just like, you just have to roll with what you have, and you lose the rigidity around, or you have to, if you want to be happy, you just have to, yes, I would love for them to just eat kale burgers and, whatever, but like, they're not going to always do that. You just have to drop all of your notions of what you think things should look like in life. And you just have to like go with the flow. And as like a very driven Capricorn type person, that was a huge, blessing in my life, because I would have just kept going on like, go, charge up the mountain. And it forces you to stop and take a look around to the environment and be like, what do they need? What's best for them? And our house being this kind of, tree house type thing, it's great for my girls, and it's individual. Every kid on the spectrum is totally different, and as you go through it as a parent, you start to look around, or, if you have a friend that's on the spectrum, you start to see like, oh my God, well, all of these musicians that I know, like, God, I think he's on the spectrum. I'm like, that artist girl, like she's on and you start to see it's not that they're weird, these people that you grew up with. It's just that, they learn different. Everything is done in a completely through a different lens, and it increases your empathy for most people on the planet. It really just opens up this whole other world for you, where you just have to take one day at a time. And, as a parent, you do have to advocate. School systems are already so overly impacted and flooded with just the requests and the amount of services needed just for general education, right? So for a parent of a special needs child, they're going to offer you services, but you have to be incredibly vocal and more demanding than I think a lot of people are comfortable with in order to get your child the best possible, because it's like anything in life. It's like, no one's going to be like, do you want $5 or do you want $1 million? They're going to give you $5 but you have to shoot for 1 million. You might only get 500 for them, but that might mean, an extra 20 minutes a week of speech or an extra whatever. So you're always having to just pay attention and be aware of what's going on. And I think that, we live in a great, there's services all over the country, and the first step is always, before you even have to worry about a diagnosis, you can look for a regional center, and that's what they're called in your local area. And they kind of will serve as like the quarterback for you a little bit, just kind of like, what the hell is going on here? Where can you find early intervention services? Where can you find programs, et cetera, et cetera? The regional centers are kind of, and they have them everywhere. So that's kind of going to be your first step as a parent. But absolutely, like, the world is much more vibrant having these children than I could ever have imagined. And the dark cloud is very much non-existent.
I would love for you to just walk us through a typical day in the life, because I think another thing that you have done in this journey is to create a structure in your days and in your business and in your life so that you have enough space for all the things that you want to do. And I think that that's really hard as a single mom to create that space. And so I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about your routines and practices that you have to make sure that you make time for yourself as well.
The last couple of years was obviously crazy because I had the girls home with me all the time. And so, they go and see their dad, who lives about 5 minutes away, on the weekends most of the time. So I'm pretty much working all weekend, shooting things for work, photographs for, vintage clothing, getting stuff uploaded, prepping and, trying to further my education in life if I want to learn things, work on the garden, without, having to wrangle kids all the time or whatever. Again, going back to the autism component, finding the right program for your kids, and nothing's going to be perfect, right? In a perfect world, I would have them at a school that's outdoors and there's animals and they're making sauerkraut from cabbage they grew in the garden. And, it's like, yeah, I have a dream space in my mind that maybe one day will be a reality. But, you have to kind of just be like, okay, they're happy going here. I have fought for as much as I can. And you just have to learn to just kind of let go and check in, make sure that it's all going on. But having that component situated, it kind of lets everything else roll out. They go to bed very early. Usually when the sun is going down now, it's like 5:30, they're getting tired, which is great. And so it's definitely not intuitive for me to do meditation, but it's something that I kind of force myself to do every day. And it always is, I'm always, thankful that I've done it. And I took a transcendental meditation course about a year ago, actually. And so I always make time for that at night. It's 20 minutes. I try to make time for it in the morning, which isn't always easy because I tend to, go. And then I just make myself some dinner and hang out. My boyfriend he's long distance. So we, FaceTime and I'll play guitar and go to bed and start it all over the next day.
Just in time for your holiday shopping, we are excited to announce our partnership with Kennebec Forge, a Maine-made heirloom quality garden hand tool business. Designed by Hostel Valley Living homesteader Kirsten Lee Nielsen and crafted by master blacksmith Derek Glazier, founder of the New England School of Metalwork. Hand-forged with locally sourced materials, these tools are as tough as nails and made to stand the test of time. They are the perfect gift for the cultivators in your life. This limited run is selling out fast. Get one before they're gone. Order by December 13th for Christmas delivery. Visit urbanexodus.com/shop to learn more.
You spoke briefly about the house, and the house story to me is such a beautiful story because I know you found the house when you were just looking for a rental, and your house is so unique, and the story of kind of your community coming together to make it possible for you to have this house is really beautiful as well. Could you share some of the history of the house and talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we moved back. My ex-husband was going to school in Texas. And so I had the girls in California to get an early intervention. And we still owned this old farmhouse in Texas, that we kind of left out in this little town outside of Austin. And so I just wasn't thinking, I'm usually very much a big dreamer, magical thinker of just like anything's possible. But in that moment, I was so, I think, overwhelmed with just like being a mom, period, having the girls by myself at that point, period. And then the special needs component, and then trying to like continue to make money and grow my business and not completely lose myself, which I think any parent will tell you is not a simple task, right? To continue your own stuff. In looking for rentals, I just wasn't even thinking in that way that like I could possibly own two houses at the same time, especially one in California. I was looking for rentals and I was scrolling on this, I think it was like Zillow. I didn't even know that they had rentals. And I was scrolling on this map. And all of a sudden, you click on something and you're like, oh, it's not for me. And just looking for something that's just temporary. And I'd gone and, viewed some other places in the interim time. All of a sudden I click on this picture and it's just like my entire body lit up. I was just like, when you just every nerve in my body was like, what is happening right now? Because I grew up not far from here. And that aesthetic of handmade houses, it's the era of the vintage that I do. It's the era of the music that, I love the most. All of these late 60s, early 70s, just very like arts and crafts style, like artisan, very intentional, very one of a kind. It's that in life has always really appealed to me. And so I clicked on this picture and I didn't even know what to do. What is happening? My heart was racing. And I said, Mom, can you watch the girls for a couple hours? I want to drive up to Auburn. I need to see this house. And she's like, okay, sure. And I just drove up because I had the address was there and I was, oh my gosh, like I couldn't believe it, and it kept saying, I don't remember how they phrased it, but I called a friend of mine who was in real estate and he's like, let me look into it. And he said, it's not lendable. It's like you have to pay cash for it. It's not lendable. And it was, an amount that like, definitely don't have that much laying around, several $100,000. And I said, can you find out what's going on? And he said, found out the next day, it had been on this, there's a canal right there and it had been on the canal water and people were filtering it themselves, which you can imagine was probably not a great idea. So in order to make it lendable, the first thing they needed was city water to be piped up and the meter itself was $35,000. So since it was a probate sale and it was owned technically by this couple who had both passed by their children, they didn't want to put any money in. They just wanted it to be sold and be done with it. None of them were interested in it. It's very unique property. They were all kind of like, eh. So I was like, okay. And so now that it's not just a cash amount, it's also now there's all this increasing work that you have to have done. And I'm like, okay, this is definitely out of range. But there was never a moment where I got discouraged. My ex, who I was married to at the time, of course, was just like, this isn't going to work. And I'm like, get out of my way. Like, I've got this. Like, okay, cool. Like, and I just kept pursuing it. I wrote to the realtor. I called her, this woman, Jo Berrigan. And she was like, yep, come on up and see it. And she's like, it's been on the market for a while. And I'm like, okay. And so she's showing me a lot of the things. Like there was shag carpet on the, staircases. And it was the original, is it pergo for the parquet?
Parquet.
Like the piece parquet.
Yep.
It's kind of cool, whatever. And she's like, there's dry rot. There is, we went over all the stuff. There was this old redwood hot tub, which I was like, oh my gosh, I love stuff like that. This old round wood hot tub that had completely like fallen apart. And that was no good. The decking was no good. It was a mess. It was a mess. And there was just a maze of strange, they put accordion doors in the down, like just stuff that would make it very unappealing. But I was like, nope, this is my house. And I kept telling her, I'm like, this is my house, Jo. I don't know what to tell you. She would laugh and she's like, well, where there's a will, there's a way. And she's like, I believe you that this is your house. And I'm like, yeah. And then this one day she called me. I mean, I just kept going up and she called me and it was this cold, rainy day. And she said, hey, can you come up really quick? It's about a half hour from my mom's. She said, Mom, I got to go. Nobody had money they could give me. It wasn't like my family was going to be like, hey, we believe in you. I ran up and she's like, I want you to meet these guys. And one of them was an older gentleman who's a realtor that she'd known through work for a long time. And the other one was a contractor, really sweet. And she's, introduces me to them. And they're just like looking at me like, what are we doing? And she's like, I want you to tell them your story. And I'm like, okay, like Molly. And, I have these daughters. This is my dream home. This is why it's my dream home. This is, I used to come up here with my dad all the time and go to the junk stores when I was a little girl. I just have such amazing memories of this area. I had no idea something like this existed, blah, blah, blah. And, I told them about my daughter being autistic. And, I just remember the contractor just looking at me. You can tell that he was a dad and maybe he had a special needs child. I don't know. I never found out, but he just like looked at me and I could see in his eyes that he was just like, I want this girl to have this. And that night, Joe, the realtor, called me and she says, Molly, they're putting in an offer, a cash offer, and they send it to the family and see what they say. But their intention is to fix it up and sell it to you so you can get a loan for it. And I was like, oh my God, like, I can't even believe this. And it was just like this kind of thing. I don't know, maybe it happens to people, but the entire time, like before they even sold it to me, I had found a redwood, an old Smith and Gordon and Smith redwood hot tub from these dealers over the mountain in Placerville. It was like $1,000, like way less, never had been used. And I bought it. And I was just like, can I stick this in the driveway? Like, I didn't know in the house. And they're like, yeah, of course. And like, they were like, okay, well, if you want this hot tub, we have to pour this concrete slab. In the closing price, it's going to be another $3,000 to re-engineer this. And I'm like, yep, I want it. And they would just do it. Do you want the decking? Normally we would do this in cedar. If you want it in redwood, it's going to be more money. Yep, I want it. And they just trusted me the whole time. The wild thing is, when I was working in the high fashion industry, right before that, I had what do they call it? I had a temp job that turned into a regular job at Zappos, the web's most popular shoe store. It used to be on 1000 Van Ness, and I ran their call center for about a year and a half, 2 years. In that time, they'd given us each a little bit of stock, a little bit. And I remember my dad was still alive at the time, and he said, honey, if you can, and this is, I had 6 roommates up on Haight-Ashbury. It's like, none of us had any money. It was so expensive to live there. He's like, if you can, I would try to buy a little bit more. And I did. It was a huge stretch for me. Well, 15 years later, Zappos was bought by Amazon. And so when I cashed out of that, it was almost the exact amount of what I needed to put down on the house and get those floors redone. It was like almost to within $1,000, like the same what I needed. So it was just this completely meant to be situation, and kind of a testament to, when people are like, oh, you're so lucky. It's like, no, I mean, I'm not like an overly like woo-woo person, but there's definitely something in the power of like manifestation and positive thinking and talking, like in what you say I think we all come across a lot of people on the road who are like, this is a reason that this can't work out. And I'm like, nope. Like it might take me a while, but it's going to happen. And so, yeah, I was able to get it. And it really is something that on a daily basis, I am like, I can't believe this is my house. And I think it'll always feel that way. Like, wow. And the neighborhood it's just full of the best people. It really is. We're actually, my neighbor Joyce, who we're really close to, she's an animal lover. And she's like, I just feel, she has lots of chickens. She's like, I just always wanted goats. And I just feel like, I have an acre. She has a couple acres. And she's like, I just feel like the girls would love raising these. And I'm like, oh, so we're kind of talking about the possibility of, I'm like, okay, figure out what the vet bills are. I'm like, very practical, it's just kind of a magical place where everybody will come together and helps each other out a lot. And, not far from town, but it feels like you're a million miles away. But so yeah, that experience, and when I tell people that story, it's just, I hope that it shows people that no matter what you're dreaming of, I think that we're all kind of like, oh, keep it small, but it's like, go big, and there's no reason it can't happen. Somebody had to get that house. Why can't it be me? Right.
So you've worked in vintage, obviously, for many years, and you transitioned from a brick and mortar store into online sales. And I would love for you to kind of share the founder story of Squash Blossom Vintage and the pivots that you've made to build a sustainable business. Because I think that there are a lot of people that might be listening to this that maybe they have a side hustle, or maybe they have a business in a city, but like that idea of being able to pick up that business and move to a more remote place, that's very scary to them.
I think when you're building your dream, and it was not something that I really thought down the line far, I was just kind of, okay, like, I like doing this. I'm good at doing this. For me, and I think for a lot of people, and I think this is something that people have challenges with, you have to go through often a period where you're going to kind of be supporting somebody else's dream. So which is fine, for a vintage dealer, I think everyone thinks like, I'm just going to dive in and be this huge vintage dealer and have this huge following and I have great stuff and look at me or whatever. But the reality is it's not unlike any other business. You have to pay your dues in another way. You have to build trust in clients. You have to be authentic. And I think that's something that gets lost a lot these days. For me, I was fortunate to get asked to consign at a lot of great places, like in Austin, like at Prototype Vintage, that's run by great women who are that was their dream. And I was excited I got to be a part of that, but I knew that wasn't going to be sustainable forever for me. That was their thing. I started doing pop-ups during South by Southwest, the large music festival at the Hotel San Jose. And in that, I was able to kind of get more exposure as far as the kind of clients that have always been drawn to the style I do. For vintage, and I would venture to say for anything, I think the key to success that I can tell is to not cast this net and umbrella that is massive, but to really try to hone what your special thing is. What do you do that's better than everybody else? What style? It has to be very niche-y, right? Early on, you might think, well, who's going to care about late 60s, like this late 60s, early 70s thing like I do? But the thing is, there are people for everything. I hope, and what I have intentionally done now, I can think about it more, but I was just kind of doing it organically, is, you're creating a space where people can come to shop and they would know that anything that I am selling is going to be, good. It's going to be, if you like what I do, any of these things would probably work for you. They might be a little outside of your comfort zone, but they're all in the same kind of that sweet spot. If you really can get very specific about what it is you want to do, I think that it, for me, really increased the possibility for a quicker success. So I was doing pop-ups once a year for South by San Jose, they called it. It was at the Hotel San Jose during South by Southwest, and it was great. So I got a lot of my longtime customers now, musicians and actors and stuff like that, but also the people who love those things, who gravitate towards this style of music, towards this style of art and filmmaking. And so, just kind of kept going. Social media, as much as I am not a big fan of anything tech, I'm I get very nervous. It's been such an amazing tool. I've met so many incredible people that way. And it's kind of such a beautiful thing to just kind of fast track, finding people with similar interests and similar, who like vibrate on the same, level as you or whatever, rather than go around for the rest of your life and, oh, like this one person, it's like, here's someone doing cool stuff. And again, it's, I think weeding out authenticity. I think being authentic at what you do and doing what comes natural to you, I think is so important, doing what you truly love, which sounds so cliche, but if it doesn't feel like work, you're going to continue to pour energy into it. And I think you're going to be better at it. I was always the kid that would like have my mom drive me to like Borders books when I was like 12 and 13. And I would sit there and, go through like French Vogue and, all these Italian fashion magazines. And they probably thought, what is this like little girl doing here? Nobody was into that kind of stuff. I didn't fit in at my high school, it was like suburban, whatever. But like, I didn't know at the time, I wasn't trying to be cool. Like, oh, I'm going to be fashion. Like, I just loved it. And so it kind of carried with me, and through college, I kind of, pushed it aside and was just like, no, I got to do something responsible. But truly, like, this is one of those things that I'm really good at. And, once I kind of just said, okay, I'm just going to go with this, everything kind of fell into place. Probably make more than I would have if I had done something with my college degree, because I probably would have been, I don't know what I would have been doing with any of the things that I studied. Because it wasn't, not that I'm not passionate about, women's studies or aspects of communication or anything, but this is just something that I'm constantly wanting to research, that I'm constantly reading about and watching old films. And, I love it. So getting really honed in, I think, is such an important element of, picking up and leaving a city and, having the confidence too, to just be like, yeah, I can do this. There's with vintage, there's supports like eBay and Etsy. You can obviously sell on those things. And now they've got Depop and Poshmark and Grailed and, a million different ways that you can do it. But if you're really wanting to do your own thing, those things are not a terrible way. Doing a collective pop-up, doing a, Depop or a Etsy store or whatever to kind of, build in social media, build a following of people who are going to come back and trust your taste and trust your vision and trust your authenticity, which always comes back to me to be like the most important thing, and something I didn't really realize until social media was not a super common thing. There's a lot of people saying I'm this or pretending to be something. And I think people eventually get it. They eventually can see through that, and it's going to lead to failure, in my opinion. So if you can really just, even if it's something that you're like, it's so dorky what I like doing, but it's like, I love it. There's going to be people who are going to be stoked on it. And that's going to keep you motivated to, keep going. Yeah. So social media, such a great tool. And now I'm working on a website, but I'm just right now selling through Instagram stories. And everybody knows, like, Tuesdays at 9 Pacific, that's when I put my stuff through. And it's been such a great way of being able to kind of manage my life and my kids. It's kind of a perfect sweet spot for running it all.
I mean, I love how you do that. And it's also like, it feels so much more manageable in a way, it doesn't require a lot of technical expertise. I think what you said about, curation and really finding a voice, like, that's really important in all businesses, not just vintage, but, if you have a brick and mortar store in the city, or you're like, I am really obsessed with this one thing, like, get tight, like, figure out exactly what it is. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, your music and what the transition has been like. Motherhood is an involved thing. And I think that a lot of artists, myself included, when you have kids, you kind of put stuff up on the shelf, but you've recently kind of gotten back into music. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about music and its role in your life and kind of your creative process, where you find your passion.
Music is an especially, I think, challenging artistic form as a mom, as a parent, right? typically especially during the pandemic, you can write and do things, but typically it involves performance, right? And moving about the world, which can be really challenging. And I got so involved in my business and everything that, for a handful, like 4 or 5 years, I was just kind of playing for my girls. I would play guitar just for them, and they always loved that. And we sing all the time. And the great thing is my boyfriend plays, that's what he's always done, is music. And so when I see him, if he has a gig that he's maybe putting a lot of people together for, he always, draws me in. Because a lot of the times I have so many interests and so many things that I'm wanting to learn all the time that it's challenging for me to make the time for each one of those. So it's kind of organically been this great thing where I can go and, practice with them and sing with them, play. And he's here with me this weekend out there making calls where we can actually come together and do those things more. And it's kind of just, there's a knowledge in me that knows that it's not even like, well, I'm going to put a pin in it, but it's like that there is going to be more of that later. And it's not this like, I think people have a tendency to say things like, oh, I used to do that and I quit doing it or whatever. I'm like, no, never quit something you love. I mean, I just 2 days ago when I got here, took my first flamenco dance class that I've taken in 20 years. I used to be a flamenco dancer or something. And something I missed, but it was never in me. I never had that negative talk of like, you're so stupid for quitting or whatever. I was just like, I'm excited to get back to that someday. And, now that we're in Los Angeles just for the week up in Laurel Canyon, I knew that there was more opportunities for me to get to do that. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to take a couple classes. And I did. And it was such an amazing time. And I think music for me, it's always going to be something that is a daily part of my life, playing and singing. But the performance aspect, it's kind of like when I'm away from my girls at this point in their life, that's kind of when that happens. And it very well may be something that I have to create the time, away for. But right now I haven't put that at like the front burner. There's like so many burners with me. I'm always like, oh, I'm going to take this class. And I just always am wanting to learn something.
I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to all of you listeners who have made contributions toward the production of this podcast. Every season, I spend about 100 hours preparing, writing, editing, interviewing, and distributing the podcast. And I have hard costs for my editor and for those hosting fees. And it really means so much to me that you find enough meaning and value in this podcast to pledge your support and to keep it going. And if you haven't had a chance to contribute, we've made it really easy for you. Just click the support button on the top of Urban Exodus website and pledge any amount that you like. Thank you again. I really couldn't continue to do this work without you.
You mentioned it, and it's true. You have basically kind of stepped into this influencer space when you were really kind of promoting your business, and your Instagram is really kind of an extension of your business. I mean, it feels like your business, but I really appreciate that you've used your platform to speak up on these major issues that we're facing in society. And I wondered if you had any advice for other people from privileged positions that can speak to a wide audience on ways to be braver and to speak up for your values, even if it might be difficult.
I mean, I definitely could be more brave. And that's the fine line. It's the fine line, like how, I grew up with more conservative parents, right? And so I think I have a much broader view of a lot of things. It's rather than just be like, this is how I feel, it's like, I really think about it a lot. How could I actually maybe, I think the pandemic has made it even more stark where it's just like, we're here, black and white about, issues in life. And when in reality, there's a lot of gray area people that are just, I think a lot of people are existing in that middle space. And it's like, in order to reach people and actually have any sort of maybe positive dialogue with them, I always try to really think about how to approach that. I don't want to alienate people who I could possibly reach, and it's such a tough fine line that I still don't have a good handle on. So it might be saying a little bit and then doing a special sale and donating it to all the proceeds to, I paired with a nonprofit called The Color of Autism. When the Black Lives Matter movement was really starting to gain speed, I thought about it and I'm like, well, this is personal, to all of us. And it's not something that, like, a woman like me, just, how do I even speak to this? And the way that it really hit me is I really started researching how autism affects different communities who are maybe underserved. And I really started thinking about the challenging time I've had as a privileged white mother in trying to access the best services. And I just kept thinking, like, oh my God, like, for people who literally, like, nobody is just going to be like, here's all this resources you want. It's such a daunting task. And I've noticed even in, the towns that we've lived in, families where the children are, the parents are maybe first generation from whatever country they came from, I can tell how scared, and they've told me they feel to speak up and try to ask for more for their kids because of this fear around, deeply ingrained deportation, anything you can imagine. And I just, whoa, it blows me away. So for me, making it more personal in a way of like, okay, I can see, let's say with autism, with anything on the spectrum, like, I can see how hard it is for anybody to access that. And then if you're in a community, especially, and that not with Black Lives Matter, but like with other communities and other cultures, there's a lot of shame around, especially male children having, any sort of, we'll call it a deficiency, even though that's not what it is, any sort of thing like that. There's so much work to be done multiculturally in allowing, and not allowing, but just having full access to and educating, like making it very clear to people that this is yours. You can have this, this is your child's right to have this. And it's just not like that. So I have always chosen to, put money towards things like that and talk about specific things that I see. And it's just a constant learning and education. It's really challenging as a small business owner to be in a position though, where you're like, I want to say something. How do I say this? How do I say this? How do I say this without, and I don't mean alienating people from my business, but I mean, I don't want people to just shut off and not hear what I'm saying. So it's a constant, and things, it happened with the pandemic. It happened with everything. It's really a challenge to constantly, think about like, what is the best way? What is the best way to say this? So I've done it to the best of my ability currently. And it's something I give a lot of thought to. And I definitely can always do better.
I think that choosing something that you can speak to personally, that you are personally affected by, can speak on from experience, and can send, money and attention and energy towards that. I think that is absolutely the way to go. The last few years have been incredibly overwhelming and really hard. And, the polarization is there, and there are certain words. I've had this conversation with so many people. There are certain words that, like, if you say those words, like, immediately the wall comes up. And
yeah.
And what are the words? And and so it's
ever changing.
It's ever changing, and it's hard. But like, just constantly, trying to check in with yourself. Am I doing enough? Thinking about ways that you could do more. I really appreciate that about you.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
I wondered if you wanted to tell us any plans that you have for the future, exciting, things that you're working on, other stuff that's going on in your life right now?
Yeah, it's funny actually being up here in Laurel Canyon. It's like, I don't even know when it happened, probably 6 or 7 months ago. Again, being a mother, being a business owner, having special needs children, I'm always, I think you're always fighting as a parent to keep yourself in the mix, and I think I've done a good job of making sure that I remain there, that I have a life outside of being a special needs parent. I have a life outside of being a mom. I would love to have a place like in this area that I could go to on the weekends, that I could fly, take a quick flight, or because, where I live, it's so perfect for how I want to raise my girls. And it's perfect. It's like, I'll always love it there, but it's kind of the opposite thing, right? I mean, not from probably a lot of the people that you've had on here. They would probably, be more in my position. But, if you're in Los Angeles, I was like having dinner my first night here and talking to this guy, and he's like, oh yeah, going to Joshua Tree. And, it's you're escaping to like the more open road, right? Getting out of the city and whatever, and having the quiet and the solitude and whatever. For me, at the end of the week, I'm kind of like, I'm ready to dive in and have culture and museums and food and, flamenco classes and musical performances, things that we don't have as much access to here. I know as I get older and as my girls get older and I continue to be more and more in the mix, I'm really going to want to be able to be in communities, more often, like a large city, just during those times. And then you get to pop back out, and that's kind of the dream for me, to be able to have a way to immerse myself in culture more often that's more diverse from where we live. So that's something that, and that's why I started doing this extra sale. I take that money and I immediately get it out of my account and I put it in a place where I cannot touch it. And down the road, whenever the time is right, I hope that, will be accessible to me, whether it's here, who knows where, or maybe I'll want a spot on a river someday that I can take the girl, who knows? But for now, it's, the work thing just keeps progressing organically. And I mean, I would love to eventually do a cookbook, get more comfortable maybe on video stuff so I can do more cooking demo stuff and kind of just see where that could roll out and take me. It's something I enjoy. I'm not a trained cook at all, but it seems like when I've shared things that I make, people are like, oh, that somebody the other day said, it seems like it's easy when you want, I don't know any special cooking techniques. So I just like sharing the things that I love, and I don't know where that's going to take me, but it's kind of rolled itself out very naturally in a way that I haven't had to give it too much thought or push. So other than just this, like having an extra sale or trying to, when I have a couple extra bucks, throw it in a place for later on. I mean, that's the only thing that I'm like intentionally, putting energy towards, just kind of like, there's something out there in the future. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm going to do my best with my resources and with my life to be a good mom and girlfriend and friend and business owner and, ally and all of the things, and try to work towards something. Keep dreaming, keep manifesting.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Molly Leary. I really appreciate her honesty and positivity in speaking about the joys and trials of her life, and her inner strength and her ability to find good in every situation. I appreciate her candidness when she speaks about the complexities of finding a balance between being an advocate and caregiver for her daughters while still trying to maintain her own health, well-being, and goals for the future. She has intentionally manifested a life and livelihood that allows her to be fully present with her girls when they are home with her, And that is something, as a mother and business owner myself, that I truly admire about Molly and strive to work towards in my own life. Molly talking about finding a balance between living in the country and frequent visits to the city is a common theme in the folks I've interviewed for this project. This is something anyone considering leaving the city should think about. Ask yourself how far you are willing to live away from the unique offerings that only a city can provide, and whether you will need to continue to have access to those things in the long run. That might dictate how close or far away you live from a city center. When I first moved, I did a weekend drive to New York City every couple of months for a taste of city life. But over time, my needs for those infusions have decreased significantly. Now, that isn't true for everyone I've met through this project, so it's really important to think about that before you pack your bags and leave the city. I also hope that Molly's interview speaks to those of you who have children or family members with special needs. The pandemic has been such a difficult time for parents and caregivers who haven't been able to have the same access to educational and support services for their loved ones. It has also exposed the cracks in our current care options because there truly isn't equal access for all, nor is it easy to navigate and find services, both in rural and urban spaces. If you plan on moving to a rural area, it is always important to research what health, education, and social services are available before you choose a location. No two rural communities are the same, and that research might tip the scale for one small town over another. We have included resources for anyone researching moving to a rural area with a special needs loved one in Molly's episode feature on the blog. In addition, you will find photos and interview questions from my visit with Molly back in 2019, including photos of her incredibly unique home, links to her social accounts, and her website by visiting urbanexodus.com/blog. Hi friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. Urban Exodus is a labor of love and is only made possible by listener support. I do this work because the people I meet through this project give me energy and hope for the future. My mission is to promote the work of people manifesting good in the world. We are living in a time where there's an overwhelming feeling of dread, and I want this project to encourage people to be proactive and work towards finding creative solutions for both their individual happiness and our collective experience. You can support this work by clicking the support button at the top of urbanexodus.com, by buying an ad spot in an upcoming episode, by shopping our online store, or taking an in-person or online course through our workshops at How Hill Farm. We are also slowly getting our Patreon page together, and we'll be adding bonus features and other content there, so check out patreon.com/urbanexodus to learn more. Another way to support is by giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and recommending Urban Exodus to your friends. Thank you again for helping me continue to do this work. I couldn't do it without all of you. You can find Urban Exodus on Instagram and Facebook at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks who ditched the city and went country, visit urbanexodus.com. Until next time, I'm Alyssa Hessler, and this is The Urban Exodus.